In 1900, a woman walks into a painted garden. She reaches behind an oversized cabbage. She pulls out a living baby, sets it on the ground like produce, then does it again. That footage is real. That film is from 1900, and it is, according to film historians, the oldest surviving narrative film in human history. The woman playing the fairy is named Yvonne Mugnier-Sarand. The director is Alice Guyblash. And the story it tells: babies grown in a garden, harvested by a stranger, delivered to families, is not an accident. It is the first story cinema ever chose to tell. Today I want to show you why. Because that image, babies without parents, emerging from the earth, did not come from nowhere. It was already everywhere. February 1896, Paris. A 22-year-old secretary named Alice Guy is walking down Boulevard Poissonnière. She is heading toward the cabarets of Montmartre. She passes a storefront she has never noticed before. The windows are lit. She stops. Inside, against the wall, are rows of glass and metal boxes. And inside those boxes are living human infants, premature babies, some small enough to fit in a man's palm. They are lying in machines modeled after chicken egg incubators, because that is exactly what they are. The inventor, a French engineer named Alexander Lion, had patented this device on October 28, 1889. He based the design on poultry equipment, and he funded the entire operation by charging the public admission to come and watch newborns fight for their lives. 50,000 visitors paid to see these babies in the first year alone. Alice Guy was one of them. Her granddaughter, Regine Blashbolton, confirmed this decades later. Alice walked into that storefront, saw infants displayed in glass boxes for paying strangers, and 3 months later, she created the first narrative film ever recorded. The fairy, harvesting babies from a cabbage garden. This is where most people would stop and call it a coincidence. But I want you to look at something. The Art Nouveau poster advertising Alexander Lyon's exhibition, the one plastered on the walls of Paris that year, was designed by an artist named Adolfo Hohenstein. It shows a nurse cradling 3 infants. Behind her, vines sprout baby heads in place of flowers. Drawings of children growing like botanical specimens fill the background. This poster hung on the streets of Paris in 1896. Babies depicted as things that grow on plants. Not born, grown. That visual language existed on a Paris boulevard before the postcards, before the dolls, before any of it. And Alice Guy walked past it on her way to work. Now, between 1900 and 1920, hundreds of thousands of postcards flooded Europe and North America. They all showed the same thing. Babies growing in cabbage patches. Babies pulled from the earth like vegetables. Babies being tended by gardeners and delivered to couples who browsed through them like shoppers selecting fruit. These were not produced by one company running a single campaign. They came from dozens of studios: Germany, France, Russia, Spain, Britain, the United States. Multiple languages, multiple artistic styles. No documented coordinating source. Art historians classify them as whimsical birth announcements, sentimental imagery, harmless folklore, and they are partially right. In France, children had been told for centuries that boys come from cabbage patches, girls from rose bushes. French parents still call their babies mon petit chou, my little cabbage. In Scotland, children placed cabbage leaves outside to ask fairies for siblings. In Ireland, you were told you were found under a stalk of cabbage. The folklore is old. It is widespread. So let me be honest with you about something. Maybe the postcards are exactly what art historians say they are. Birth announcements based on folk tradition. Charming, innocent, unconnected to anything darker. If this were the whole picture, I would accept that and move on. But the timeline refuses to stay innocent. Because during the exact decades these postcards circulated, 1900 to 1920, the largest mass displacement of children in American history was already underway. September 20th, 1854. A train pulls out of New York City. It is carrying 46 children. They range from infants to 12 years old. No parents are with them. No family waits at the destination. When the train arrives in Dowagiac, Michigan, the children are lined up on a railroad platform. Local families walk past, inspect them, and choose which ones to take home. This is the first orphan train. The last train departs on May 31, 1929, carrying 3 children to Sulphur Springs, Texas. By then, between 200,000 and 250,000 children will have been transported this way. At peak volume, 3,000 to 4,000 children per year were shipped west. The first agent, E.P. Smith, let passengers adopt boys without checking references. He played on audience sympathy, pointing out that boys were handy and girls could be used for all types of housework. Many of these children were used strictly as farm labor. Many were not orphans at all. They were children of immigrants, of poor families. The co-founders of the program later acknowledged this. The children traveled for days, sometimes on trains barely better than cattle cars. 2 or 3 adult chaperones supervised 30 to 40 children at a time. When they arrived, they had no birth certificates, no verified family histories, no provable identity. An estimated 2 million descendants are alive today, many of whom still cannot trace their lineage past the train platform. Where did they come from? The culture had an answer. The Cabbage Patch. Not literally, but functionally. The mythology did the same work as a shrug. But the orphan trains were only the American chapter. Across the Atlantic, the system was older, and much, much larger. The foundling wheel, called the ruota in Italy, was a rotating wooden cylinder built into the wall of a hospital or church. A woman could place her infant inside, ring a bell, and the staff on the other side would rotate the wheel to receive the child. Anonymous. No questions. No record of the parent. The first one was installed in Rome in 1198. By the 1400s, they had spread across Catholic Europe. By the 1800s, the numbers are staggering. Over 100,000 foundlings abandoned annually across the continent. In France, Italy, and Spain, as many as 1 in 3 babies born in cities was deposited into these institutions. France alone had 251 foundling wheels at their peak, legalized on January 19, 1811. The death rate inside these foundling hospitals averaged 80%. In some years, it approached 100. Children who survived were renamed. In Italy, they were called Esposito, meaning exposed. In Milan, they were named Colombo, after the pigeons outside the foundling home. In France, they were called trouvé, found. Parents sometimes left a token, a ribbon, a coin, a piece of torn fabric, hoping to reclaim the child someday. Most never returned. Now I want you to hold the timeline in your mind. 1198, the first foundling wheel is installed in Rome. By the 1700s, boys from cabbages, girls from roses, is the standard explanation given to children across France. 1811, France legalizes 251 foundling wheels. 1854, the first orphan train leaves New York. 1863, France begins closing its foundling wheels. 1869, Sister Mary Irene Fitzgibbon places a cradle on a Manhattan stoop to receive abandoned babies, founding the New York Foundling Hospital. 1889, Alexander Lyon patents his baby incubator, modeled on chicken egg equipment. February 1896, Alice Guy visits Lyon's incubator exhibition on Boulevard Poissonniere. Sees babies in glass boxes displayed for paying strangers. Spring 1896, she films La Fée aux Choux, the first narrative film in history, about harvesting babies from a garden. That same year, incubator babies are exhibited at the Berlin Exposition under the name Kinderbrutantstalt. That word translates to child hatchery. 1900 to 1920, cabbage baby postcards flood the Western world. 1903, Martin County opens his permanent incubator exhibit at Coney Island, displaying premature infants next to sword swallowers and sideshow acts. He charges 25 cents admission. He runs it for 40 years. Each piece connects to the next. Each decade adds another layer. And every layer uses the same language. Children as things that are grown, harvested, displayed, selected, distributed, not born to families, delivered to them, by fairies, by gardeners, by institutions. I want to be honest about something. I sat with this research for a long time before writing this. Not because the facts were hard to find. They are well documented. The problem was different. Every time I laid the timeline out, I could hear how it would sound. I could hear reasonable people saying I was forcing a pattern onto unrelated events. And I kept asking myself whether that was true, whether folklore is just folklore, whether postcards are just postcards, whether the fact that all of this clusters in the same decades across the same countries is simply what coincidence looks like at scale. But then I found what Salvador Dali said about the postcards. Dali collected them. So did André Breton. So did Paul Éluard, who called them a Lilliputian hallucination of the world. Dali called them the most lively document of popular modern thought. A thought so profound or so sharp that it eludes psychoanalysis. The surrealists did not collect them as whimsy. They collected them because they recognized something in the imagery that resisted easy explanation. A British art dealer named James Birchlater found a display case of them at the Pompidou Center, exhibited for their inspirational importance to the Dadaists and Surrealists. He published a book on them in 2010 titled Babylon, Surreal Babies. Even the art world knew these postcards carried something heavier than charm. And some of the postcards were not gentle at all. Some showed babies being sold. Some referenced lotteries of children. Some depicted gardeners tending rows of infants while couples browse and point. Like a market. The imagery is commercial, transactional. It mirrors the mechanics of the foundling system and the orphan trains with disturbing precision. Martin County ran baby incubator exhibits at Coney Island for 40 years. He almost certainly never held a legitimate medical license. He fabricated his credentials because the real medical profession refused to help premature babies at all. A Chicago doctor produced a film around this time advocating for letting them die, tagged, and I am not making this up, "Kill defectives, save the nation." The Boston Medical and Surgical Journal questioned in 1901 whether saving premature infants was even worthwhile. The eugenics movement called them weaklings who would pollute the gene pool. In this environment, the only way to save a premature baby was to display it in a glass box at an amusement park. County saved over 6,500 lives this way. His nurse, Madame Recht, would slide a diamond ring up a baby's arm to the shoulder to show audiences how small the infants were. When County died, his death certificate did not mention medicine. Neither did Alexander Lyons. Lyon, the man whose invention inspired the first movie ever made, was described on his death certificate in 1934 as a wandering salesman. 80 years after the postcards faded from circulation, the story came back. In 1976, a 21-year-old Georgia art student named Xavier Roberts discovered dolls at a craft fair. They were made by a Kentucky folk artist named Martha Nelson Thomas. Thomas had been making what she called doll babies since the early 1970s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers. Roberts purchased her dolls, then began making his own when Thomas cut him off. He renamed them Little People. A licensing agent named Roger Schleifer renamed them Cabbage Patch Kids in 1982, and created an origin mythology. The official story said Xavier Roberts was a 10-year-old boy who followed a bunny bee behind a waterfall into a magical cabbage patch, where babies were being born. Roberts sold the dolls from a converted abandoned medical clinic in Georgia that he renamed Babyland General Hospital. He did not sell them. You adopted them. Each doll came with a unique birth certificate and adoption papers. No parents listed. Born in a cabbage patch. Martha Nelson Thomas, the woman who actually created the concept, sued Roberts. They settled out of court in 1985 for an undisclosed amount. Her name disappeared from the product. Coleco mass-produced them in 1983. 3 million sold by the end of that year. 20 million in 1984. $2 billion in retail sales. Americans physically fought each other in stores to adopt these dolls. Dolls with no parents. Born from cabbages. Distributed through a converted hospital. The entire apparatus of the foundling system, compressed into a toy. And nobody noticed what the story was actually about, because the story had been telling itself for 800 years. Every culture needs a narrative to explain what it cannot say plainly. You do not tell a child that their sibling was deposited in a wooden box in a church wall by a mother who could not afford to feed them. You tell the child their sibling was found in the cabbage patch. You do not tell a community that 250,000 children were stripped of their identities and shipped across a continent on trains. You send postcards of babies growing in gardens, tended by fairies, delivered to loving homes. The fairy tale does the work of erasure. It always has. Alice Guyblash saw babies in glass boxes on a Paris boulevard and turned the experience into the first story cinema ever told. That story was about a fairy pulling children from a garden. The original 1896 film is now lost. 90% of all films made before 1929 are gone. We preserved almost nothing from the birth of cinema. The one film that might tell us what the culture was processing when it chose this story as its first has vanished. The postcards are in museum archives. The orphan train records are in genealogical databases. The foundling will mechanisms still sit in the walls of old hospitals across Europe. The Cabbage Patch Kids are in attics and storage units across America, each one with its adoption certificate still tucked inside. And somewhere between folklore and documentation, between fairy tale and institutional record, there is a question no one has properly asked. What story does a civilization tell itself when it needs to explain where all the children came from? What mythology does it build when the truth is too large, too systemic, too uncomfortable for a direct answer? And when that mythology appears in the first film, the most popular postcards, and the best-selling toy of the 20th century, all using the same image, babies without parents, harvested from a garden. What exactly are we looking at? A coincidence that spans 8 centuries and 6 continents? Or the longest-running cover story in Western history?